Today, we're basically stepping into a time machine. We're going to journey back to a world without words to discover some of India's very first art galleries. These huge, open-air museums that were literally etched onto the rock faces that sheltered our earliest ancestors.
So, picture this, a time before written language, before paper, before any of that. How do you leave your mark? How do you tell the story of your life, your fears, your whole community? This was the big challenge for our earliest ancestors.
So here's how we're going to break it down. We'll start with what it means to have a past without words. Then we'll discover India's amazing ancient galleries, decode the stories they painted, get into the artist's craft, and finally, think about what it all means for us today.
All right, first up, how do you even begin to understand a past that left behind zero written records? Let's dive right into that.
We call this era prehistory. And really, it's a time we can't just read about in books from that period, because, well, there weren't any. For a long, long time, this entire chapter of the human story was just a huge blank space. But it turns out the clues were there all along, preserved for thousands of years. Our prehistoric ancestors, they used the walls of their own homes, their rock shelters, as a canvas. They left behind the very first visual records of their lives.
Okay, so where can we actually find these incredible records? Let's jump into our second section and discover India's massive network of ancient open-air galleries.
Now, get this. Here's a fun fact that might actually surprise you. A lot of us have heard about the famous prehistoric caves in Altamira, Spain, right? Well, the very first discovery of rock paintings anywhere in the world was actually made in India a full 12 years earlier by an archaeologist named Archibald Carlyle. Pretty cool.
And look, this wasn't just some one-off discovery. This map just shows you the sheer scale of it all. Prehistoric art sites are scattered all across the country, from the Kumayan Hills up in Uttarakhand way down to Karnataka in the south. It's like a national treasure map of our most ancient stories.
And just to give you a sense of how dense this is, the area of Bhimbetka in Madhya Pradesh, which is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site, it has about 800 of these rock shelters. And of those, 500 have paintings on their walls. That is one of the most significant and packed collections of prehistoric art on the entire planet.
So, what are these paintings actually saying to us? What stories do these ancient canvases tell? Let's try and decode the messages they left behind in stone.
What's really crucial to understand is that the art wasn't static. It changed over thousands of years, and that change really mirrors how their society was evolving. The earliest art from the Upper Paleolithic period, you see these massive linear animals. It kind of suggests a world dominated by nature. But then later, in the Mesolithic period, the art gets smaller, and it focuses more on groups of people, on community life. And finally, in the Chalcolithic period, the art shows contact with settled farmers, which is a record of a huge turning point in human history.
Here's a perfect example from that early period. The whole focus is on the power and the size of this one huge animal. The lines are bold, they're simple, and they just perfectly capture the essence of this creature. Now compare that to this scene from the Mesolithic period. The scale is way smaller, there are more figures, and you get a real sense of action, of a story being told. This isn't just a picture of an animal, it's a story about people, about community, about a shared experience, like this dance. And the range of topics is just incredible. I mean, they painted everything. It was basically a visual diary of their lives. You have tense hunting scenes, joyful community dances, men riding horses, the simple act of collecting honey, and even these really intimate household scenes. These paintings give us this raw, unfiltered look at the daily struggle for survival. And here, we see both sides of that coin, the absolute terror of being hunted by a wild beast, and then the power of people working together to take down a massive bison. It's the drama of life and death, captured right there on stone. But it wasn't all just about survival. The art really emphasizes community. I mean, look at this simple but really profound image from Lakudiyar. You see human figures linked hand in hand. It's a timeless symbol of unity, of celebration, and of the social bonds that were just as crucial to their existence as any tool.
Okay, but here's a real mystery. In places like Bhimbetka, archaeologists have found paintings layered one on top of the other, sometimes up to 20 layers deep. So why would an artist paint over an existing work? Why cover up a masterpiece? Well, scholars have a few ideas. Maybe the artist just wasn't happy with their first try and wanted a do-over. Or, and this is really fascinating, maybe these specific spots on the wall were considered sacred, drawing different generations of artists to the exact same place over centuries. so each new layer becomes part of a conversation across time.
But okay, let's forget about why they painted for a second and talk about how. How on earth did they create art that has managed to last for millennia? Let's dig into the craft and the tech of the prehistoric artist.
So, creating this art wasn't simple. It was a whole process. They made their own paint by grinding up different minerals, like hematite to get red and chalcedony for green. Then they'd mix that powder with water and some kind of binder, like animal fat or tree sap, to make it all stick. And their brushes? They made those out of plant fibers. It was actually a pretty sophisticated craft. So why have these paintings survived for thousands of years? Through rain, heat, you name it? Well, it all comes down to chemistry. Turns out the oxides in their mineral-based paints had a chemical reaction with the surface of the rock, and that reaction created a permanent bond that has basically protected this art from the ravages of time.
And that brings us to our final section, the timeless legacy of these incredible paintings and why they continue to captivate us so much today. This quote right here, it really says it all. More than any tool or any bone, these paintings are the greatest treasure our earliest ancestors left behind. They aren't just pretty pictures. They are the very first data points of human culture. They are a direct window into the minds of people who lived tens of thousands of years ago, showing us not just what they saw, but how they saw their world. Think about it. They used the most advanced technology available to them, rock and pigment, to tell their stories and leave a mark that would last forever. Today, we're also telling our stories visually, every single day, with a constant stream of images and videos. These ancient paintings are a powerful reminder that the human need to communicate, to share our experiences, and to leave a mark, it's timeless. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Thousands of years from now, with all our countless images, what will they say about us? What will be our legacy?
Okay, let's travel back in time. Way back, like 4,500 years ago, to the banks of the Indus River. This is where one of the world's first great civilizations, the Harappan civilization, rose up and then kind of vanished. They left behind these incredible cities, but they also left behind a profound silence. You see, we can't read their writing. So to figure out who they were, we've got to look at the stuff they made.
And that's really the big question here, isn't it? When the words are gone, what's left to speak for an entire people? Well, for the folks in the Indus Valley, the answer is their art. The sculptures, the seals, the pottery, these are the voices we have left. And our job, together, is to figure out how to listen.
Now, you might be thinking of Egypt or Mesopotamia, right? With their giant, colossal statues of gods and kings. The Indus civilization? Totally different. Their art is intimate. It's personal. And these smaller, more refined pieces, these are our biggest clues to their beliefs, how their society worked, and what their daily lives were like.
And this guy, he's probably the most famous face of the entire civilization. They found him in Mohenjo-daro, and he's known as the Priest King. Now, he's not some giant monument. He's tiny, barely 7 inches tall. But wow, does he have a presence. There's this dignified, focused calm about him that just pulls you in.
I mean, just look at the detail here. It's incredible. You've got this trefoil pattern on his shawl, which, by the way, you also see over in ancient Mesopotamia. And check out those long, half-closed eyes. Looks like he's in deep meditation, right? The perfectly trimmed beard, the armlet, even the little holes where a necklace would have been. Every single detail hints at a person of high status and a culture with a really sophisticated sense of style.
So the Priest King shows they were amazing with stone. But believe me, that was just the start. Their mastery went way beyond that, across all kinds of materials and styles. The artists of the Indus Valley were true masters of three-dimensional form, and they really had the technical skills to bring any vision to life.
Take bronze casting, for example. They used this super sophisticated method called the lost wax technique. It's a pretty complex process. You make a model out of wax, you cover it in clay, you heat it up so the wax melts out, and then you pour molten bronze into the empty space. And what's just mind-blowing is that artists today still use this exact same technique. That's a tradition stretching back thousands of years.
And this right here? This perfectly shows you their artistic range. On one hand, you have the Priest King, all formal and dignified and stylized, and on the other, this red sandstone torso. It's so realistic, you can almost feel the soft contours of the body. One is rigid and meditative, the other is dynamic and just full of life. Totally different styles, from the exact same civilization. How cool is that?
And it wasn't just people they were good at sculpting in bronze. Just look at this bowl from Mohenjo-daro. You can almost feel its weight, its raw power, and that head turned aggressively to the side, pure fury. It's just a masterpiece of capturing that raw animal energy in metal.
Okay, so we've seen the fancy stuff, the stone and bronze. But that wasn't the whole story. The art you find the most of is actually made from something way simpler. Terracotta, baked clay. This was the art for everyday people, and it gives us a whole different window into their world.
So the text we're looking at calls these terracotta figures crude compared to the other stuff. And yeah, okay, they're not as realistic, but crude? I don't know. They have this raw, expressive power that's all their own. Let's take a closer look.
So this is what you see a lot of. These are known as mother goddess figures. Check out that wild fan-shaped headdress and all that jewelry they've piled on. So, not super realistic in the way the stone statues are, but they're incredibly stylized and powerful. They clearly represented something hugely important in their belief system, probably a goddess of fertility and life.
And it wasn't just goddesses they were making from clay, not by a long shot. You find these figures of bearded guys, who might be other gods, but you also find all this charming, everyday stuff. Toy carts with actual wheels, whistles, little birds, and even game pieces. I mean, they even made toys. It just goes to show you, art and craft were woven into every part of life, even playtime.
All right, now we get to what are, for my money, the most fascinating, most mind-bending artifacts they left behind. They're seals. They're tiny, they're incredibly detailed, and they are packed with secrets.
And when I say they found a lot, I mean a lot. We're talking thousands of these things. That sheer number alone tells you how important they were. They were probably used in trade, to stamp clay on goods, kind of like a company logo. But maybe they were also worn as good luck charms, or even as a form of ID.
So here's a classic example. Most of them were these little square plaques, about 2 inches by 2 inches. And you'll notice 2 key things on pretty much all of them. A beautifully carved animal, this one's the famous unicorn bull, and then a line of symbols up top. That is the Indus script.
So what did they make them out of? Usually a soft stone called steatite, also known as soapstone. Because it's so soft, they could carve these insane levels of detail into such a tiny space. The craftsmanship is just wow.
And here is the big catch. We have thousands of examples of their writing, and we can't read a single word of it. Not one. The inscriptions are too short, and there's no Rosetta Stone to give us a clue. It's truly one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in all of ancient history. And out of all those thousands of seals, this is the most famous one. It's often called the Pashupati seal, which means Lord of the Animals. You can see the central figure sitting in what looks like a yoga pose, and he's surrounded by an elephant, a tiger, a rhino, and a buffalo. So, who is this? The debate has been raging for years. Is it an early version of the Hindu god Shiva? Or, and this is a newer idea, could it actually be a female deity? The honest answer? We just don't know.
So beyond the big statues and the mysterious seals, you see that these people wove art into the very fabric of their daily lives. Craftsmanship wasn't just for temples or for trade, it was personal. It was for the home. And oh boy, did they love their jewelry. The collections they've dug up from places like Mohenjo-daro are just stunning. And from the art, we can tell it wasn't just for women. Men and women both decorated themselves with all kinds of necklaces, armlets, and rings. And this is where you really see how sophisticated they were. Just look at this list of materials they used to make beads. You've got everything from gold and precious gems like lapis lazuli, all the way down to simple shell and baked clay. That tells you 2 things. They had amazing trade networks and some seriously impressive technical skills.
Even something as simple and everyday as their pottery was a form of art. Most of it wasn't just handmade, it was thrown on a wheel, which gives it that fine, elegant finish. And while a lot of it was plain, the painted pottery featured these beautiful geometric patterns and animal designs. It shows a real appreciation for graceful forms, even in stuff you'd use every single day.
So we come full circle, right back to the deepest part of the mystery. We have their amazing cities, their gorgeous sculptures, their stunning jewelry, and thousands of these tiny, intricate, silent seals. In a civilization where we can't read the words, these objects, they have to speak for them. They are the voice of the Indus people.
So what story do they tell? They tell us about a people who were absolute masters of their craft, who saw beauty and art in everything from a god statue to a child's toy. and who left behind this incredibly rich, symbolic world that we can now only gaze at and wonder about. Their art is their voice. The real question left for us is, what is it trying to tell us?
Today, we're going to travel way back in time, over 2,000 years actually, back to the 3rd century BCE. We're diving deep into the incredible artistic legacy of India's Mauryan Empire. And let me tell you, it was a true explosion of creativity, all carved in stone.
So this should look pretty familiar, right? It's the lion capital of Sarnath, one of the most iconic sculptures from that whole period. And today, well, it's the national emblem of India. You see it everywhere, on money, on passports, on government buildings.
But, you know, behind this powerful symbol is a deep and absolutely fascinating history. It's a story about an emperor, a brand new religious movement, and an artistic tradition that really set the stage for centuries of Indian arts that came after it.
Okay, so let's dive in. To really understand the world that created this masterpiece, we first have to break it down and see how it was originally supposed to look. You see, the lion capital wasn't just a standalone sculpture. Nope. It was the crowning piece of a massive pillar. Originally, it had 5 parts: a towering shaft, an inverted lotus-shaped base, a drum-like slab they call an abacus, the 4 lions themselves, and right on top of it all, a giant stone wheel known as the Dharma Chakra, or the Wheel of Law. So, what was this whole thing for? Well, the entire monument was built by the great Mauryan Emperor Ashoka, and he built it to mark a really pivotal moment, the Buddha's very first sermon. That event is known as the Dhammachakra Pravartana, which means the turning of the Wheel of Law. So this wasn't just art, it was a huge religious and historical statement. And that kind of brings us to the bigger picture. See, the Sarnath pillar wasn't a one-off. Emperor Ashoka put up these massive pillars all across his vast empire. You can think of them like ancient billboards, broadcasting his rules and showing his devotion to Buddhist principles. And they were seriously impressive, true engineering marvels. They were carved from single pieces of stone. These pillars stood tall and proud, often in the middle of nowhere. Each one was a testament to the power and the incredible technical skill of the Mauryan Empire. Now, what's really amazing is the technique they used. While other empires, like the Achaemenians in Persia, were building their pillars from different segments pieced together, Mauryan pillars were monolithic. That means each one was carved from a single massive block of stone. Can you even imagine the skill it took to do that without it breaking? It's mind-boggling. So let's look closer at the lions themselves. The source material describes them perfectly. They are voluminous, with this powerful facial musculature. It gives them a sense of contained energy, like they've just taken a deep breath right before letting out a massive roar. And right beneath the lions, on that circular abacus, that flat drum-like base, there's a whole world of detail. We've got 4 animals: a horse, a bull, a lion, and an elephant. And each one is carved with this incredible energy. They look like they're moving in a procession around the base, separated by these little wheels with 24 spokes. And this right here shows you one of the true hallmarks of Mauryan art. You see that shine? It's a highly polished surface, almost like a mirror. It was a signature technique that made these stone sculptures just gleam. And honestly, it's a technique that has kind of puzzled archaeologists for centuries. But Mauryan artists didn't just carve imperial symbols and animals. No, they also created these breathtaking, monumental sculptures of human and divine figures. And a lot of times, they were drawing from beliefs that were around long before Buddhism.
See, back then, the worship of nature deities, they called them yakshas and yakshinis, was super popular. So instead of trying to get rid of these local beliefs, Mauryan art just folded them right in, creating these large-scale statues that became part of both Buddhist and Jaina monuments.
And this might be the most stunning example of all, the Didarganj Yakshini. This is a life-sized, freestanding sculpture, and again, you can see that signature Mauryan polish. It's a depiction of a female nature spirit, and she's holding a fly whisk. What's so amazing here is the incredible naturalism. The source text points out the sculptor's sensitivity to the human form. This isn't some stiff, formal idol. It's a depiction of a round, muscular, and totally lifelike body. And it's done with unbelievable skill. I mean, just look at these details. The face has these round, fleshy cheeks, and the hair, it's tied back in this incredibly intricate knot. There's this perfect balance between the sculpture's powerful, heavy presence and the delicate, precise way the artist carved her features and ornaments. So get this, the Mauryans didn't just carve blocks of stone, they carved entire mountains. This period saw the very beginning of rock-cut architecture in India, creating spaces not by building them up, but by hollowing them out of solid rock. Take a look at the Lomas Rishi Cave. This ornate arched entrance, it wasn't constructed. It was carved, millimeter by millimeter, directly out of a solid granite cliff face, made to look like the wooden buildings they had at the time. And if you go inside, there's a large rectangular hall that leads to a circular chamber, all of it just excavated from the rock. This particular cave was actually donated by Emperor Ashoka for an ascetic sect known as the Ajivakas, which just goes to show his support went beyond only Buddhism. And here's another really powerful example. This is the Dali elephant in Odisha. It's not a statue that was placed on a rock. The front half of the elephant looks like it's emerging directly from the living rock it was carved from. It's just an incredible fusion of sculpture and landscape. So when we put all these pieces together, the pillars, the sculptures, the caves, what really is the lasting legacy of Mauryan art? Well, we can see the key hallmarks pretty clearly now. You've got the mastery of carving monolithic pillars, that unique high-gloss polish, the creation of these huge freestanding figures, the very beginning of rock-cut architecture, and critically, the blending of popular beliefs into the major religious art of the time. And this timeline really puts it all into perspective. After the rise of these new religious movements, the Mauryas came to power. And then, boom, in the 3rd century BCE, Emperor Ashoka's patronage creates this incredible explosion in art. And the techniques and styles developed right here would go on to influence Buddhist art for centuries to come. Which leaves us with a final thought. We started with a symbol on a modern passport, and we ended up inside a mountain that was carved 2,300 years ago. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How do these ancient artistic choices just continue to echo through time and help define who we are today?
So, what happens when a giant empire, like the Mauryan Empire, fades away? You might think, oh, a dark age, right? Well, in India, it was the exact opposite. It was like an explosion of creativity. All these new kingdoms popped up, and they all wanted to make their mark. And their favorite way to do it? Stone. I mean, they literally transformed entire mountains and cliffs into art that, honestly, still blows our minds today. So let's dive in and see how this incredible story was written in rock. Okay, just take a second and look at this. This isn't a bunch of buildings put on a mountain, no way. This whole thing, all these temples, these monasteries, was carved out of a single solid cliff face. This is Ajanta. And it just makes you wonder, right? How on earth do you even do that? How did ancient artists go from, simple little carvings to this? That's the question we're going to tackle.
All right, so let's set the scene. Starting around the 2nd century BCE, the old empire is gone, and you've got these new powers stepping up. Dynasties like the Shungas, the Satvavahanas, the Kushanas, and at the very same time, new devotional movements are getting really popular. So you've basically got this perfect storm for art, right? You have new rulers with money, and you have new religious groups who want to build stuff, temples, stupas, you name it. And all that new funding, all that patronage, it just lit a fire under artists, sparking these incredible, unique art centers all over India.
And this wasn't something that happened overnight. We're talking about an evolution that played out over hundreds of years and across huge distances. The really cool part? The fact that the empire broke up into smaller kingdoms actually fueled all this creativity. Each region started developing its own distinct style. So you go from the really early stuff at Barhut all the way to the mind-blowing cave temples of Ajanta centuries later. It's a real journey.
So, where do we start our story? Well, we have to start with the stupa. Think of these massive Buddhist monuments as the first great canvases for Indian artists. They would just cover them with these amazing stone carvings, telling all the stories about the Buddha and his past lives. Okay, let's get our terms straight. This is basically the anatomy of a stupa. You've got the big central mound, that's where they kept sacred relics. Around it, you have a railing, called a Vedika. And to get in, you'd walk through these huge ornate gateways called Toranas. Now those railings and gateways, that's where the magic happens. That's where we see the first big explosion of storytelling in stone.
All right, check this out. This is a Yakshini, a kind of nature spirit from one of the earliest stupas at a place called Barhut. And you could really see the early style here, can't you? See how she looks well, kind of flat, almost like she's just been pressed into the stone. It's all very linear. That's what we call low relief. There's a certain stiffness to it for sure. The focus is really on the outline, not so much on making her look three-dimensional.
Now this is where the storytelling gets really clever. How do you fit a whole story in one small circle? You use a technique called continuous narrative. It's kind of like a comic strip, but all mashed into a single frame. So this panel tells a story, a Jataka tale. Over here, you see the Bodhisattva, that's the Buddha in a past life, as a golden deer, and he's rescuing this guy. But then look, in the same picture, there's that same guy pointing the deer out to the king, totally betraying him. It's such a smart, efficient way to tell a whole moral story.
Okay, now let's jump forward a bit to a place called Sanchi. And wow, look at the difference. Can you see it? The carving is so much deeper. It's what we call high relief. The figures aren't flat anymore. They feel like they have real weight, real volume. Their poses are more natural. The whole scene is just jam-packed with energy and movement. This isn't just a small step up, you guys. This is a massive leap forward in making these stone worlds feel alive.
All right, so for hundreds of years, there was this rule. You didn't show the Buddha as a person. Nope, you used symbols, an empty throne, footprints, a wheel. But then, around the 1st century CE, something huge happened, a real game changer. Two big art centers up north, Gandhara and Mathura, decided it was time. They started carving the very first human images of the Buddha.
And this is just perfect, because you can see the two completely different ways they went about it. Look at the one on the left. That's from Gandhara. See the wavy hair, the toga-like robes? That's totally Greco-Roman influence, a very Hellenistic vibe. Now look at the one on the right, from Mathura. Totally different, right? This one is based on older Indian statues of powerful spirits called yakshas. The face is rounder, the body's more powerful, and the robe is so thin you can see the form underneath. It's a much more homegrown, indigenous style.
So while all that's going on up in the north, let's travel way down south. Because at the same time, a totally different kind of artistic revolution was taking place. We're heading to the Vengi region, to a place centered around the incredible stupa at Amaravati.
The stupa at Amaravati was something else entirely. Its whole dome, the entire thing, was covered in these amazing carved limestone panels. It was just this massive, curved canvas for storytelling. And the scenes themselves are, wow, they are so dense, so full of energy. You've got figures twisting and overlapping everywhere. It's just a whirlwind of activity.
So what makes the Amaravati style so special? Well, first, it's all about elegance and movement. The figures are long and slender, and they often have this graceful S-shaped curve to their bodies, a pose called Tribhanga. And man, there's just so much emotion and action in every panel. The artists here got really, really good at creating a sense of depth too. By overlapping all those figures, they make these crowded scenes feel like you're looking through a window into a real three-dimensional space.
Okay, now we've reached the final leg of our journey. And honestly, this might be the most breathtaking part of all. We're going to the Western Ghats, to the rock-cut caves, because this is where artists took the ultimate leap of faith. They decided, you know what? Let's not just carve on the stone anymore. Let's carve our buildings out of the stone.
This right here is one of the earliest examples. It's a prayer hall, or chaitya, at a place called Baja. And I need you to get this. Nothing you see here was built. Not one stone was laid on top of another. The arch, the columns, the stupa you can see way in the back, it was all carved out of the solid rock. It was hollowed out. It's like it's a sculpture that you can actually walk inside. How cool is that?
And from there, they just got bigger and bigger. This is the inside of the prayer hall at Karla. The scale here is just immense. I mean, can you even imagine the skill this took to carve these perfect rows of columns, this huge curved ceiling, all from solid rock, probably working by lamplight? It's not just art. It's an absolutely mind-boggling feat of engineering and pure faith.
But you know, it wasn't all just about carving stone. At Ajanta, we find something truly special and incredibly rare. We find paintings. Beautifully preserved paintings that are over 1,500 years old. These murals would have covered the walls and ceilings, telling stories from the Buddha's life in brilliant color. It's like a time capsule, giving us this precious window into what the world actually looked like back then.
And then there's Ellora. What makes Ellora so amazing is that you have Buddhist, Hindu, and Jain caves all carved right next to each other. It's this incredible testament to tolerance. And the sculpture here, especially in the Hindu caves, just hits a whole new level of power. I mean, look at this Shiva. It is monumental. It's bursting with this raw cosmic energy. It doesn't feel like a statue. It feels like a moment of pure divine power just frozen in time.
So, let's just take a breath. We've just traveled through almost 1,000 years of Indian art. We've seen this incredible journey, right? From these simple flat carvings all the way to creating entire worlds out of mountains. It was just an age of non-stop innovation and just breathtaking creativity. So let's just quickly recap that whole evolution. Step 1, artists figure out how to tell stories on flat stone panels. Step 2, they master carving in deep relief, making things look way more realistic. Step 3, the huge revolutionary idea of actually showing the Buddha as a person. And Step 4, the grand finale, where they take all those skills and carve entire buildings out of living rock. What a journey.
I love this quote. It's about the paintings at Ajunta, but listen to what it says. The figures are heavy, like the sculptures. That's so cool, isn't it? It shows you how these artists were thinking. Even when they were painting, they weren't trying to make things look light and airy. They wanted their painted figures to have that same sense of weight, of volume, that powerful sculptural feel that defined the art of this whole era.
And that really brings us to the big final question, doesn't it? When you look back at everything we've seen, these stupas, these caves, the amount of human effort is just staggering. This wasn't the work of one artist or even one generation. We're talking about centuries of labor. So the thought I want to leave you with is, what is it that drives people to do something like this? What is it about faith or community or just that basic human need to create that makes a society pour everything it has into carving mountains into monuments? It's something to think about.
Today, we're going to take a journey, a trip back in time, to explore a really magnificent and honestly often overlooked artistic legacy, the incredible mural traditions of South India. So when you think of ancient Indian painting, what's the first thing that pops into your head? For most of us, it's the absolutely stunning murals of the Ajanta caves. But that was over 1,500 years ago. So what happened after that? Did this incredible skill, this grand tradition of painting on walls just vanish? No way. It didn't end at all. It just moved. The artistic flame that was lit at Ajanta was carried south, and there it sparked a whole series of vibrant, powerful new mural traditions that would thrive for more than 1,000 years.
Okay, so our story really kicks off in the 6th century in a place called Badami, which was the capital of the early Chalukyan dynasty. This right here is the crucial first link. It's the bridge that connects the classical art of Ajanta to everything that came after in the south.
And check this out. This is basically our roadmap for the journey. From the Chalukyas, the brush gets passed to the Pallavas and the Pandyas. Then it hits this incredible high point with the Cholas, before it completely transforms under the massive Vijayanagara Empire, and finally, it branches out into these later schools of the Nayakas and Kerala. It's an unbroken chain of artistry. It's amazing. The style we see in the Badami caves, which were patronized by the Chalukya king Mangalesha, is really a direct extension of what was happening at Ajanta. You can totally see it in those sinuous, flowing lines, the organic, fluid feel of the figures, and those tightly packed compositions. These are all hallmarks they inherited from the earlier masters.
Let's get a little closer and look at the figures themselves. The artists here were using techniques straight from the Vakataka period of Ajanta, and you can see it so clearly in the gracefully drawn faces. Notice the large eye sockets, those half-closed eyes, and the really distinct protruding lips. But their real genius, their true skill, is how they create this sense of three-dimensional volume with just a simple, elegant treatment of the line. All right, so from the Chalukyas, the tradition moves even further south, right into the Tamil heartland. And here, under the patronage of 3 major dynasties, the Pallavas, the Pandyas, and the Cholas, mural painting finds this powerful new form of expression.
You know, great art needs a great patron, right? Well, they don't come much more enthusiastic than the 7th century Pallava king, Mahendravarman I. I mean, just look at his titles. The Curious-Minded One, A Tiger Among Artists, and The Temple Builder. This wasn't just some king funding stuff. This was a true art lover who was actively driving its creation. So after the Pallavas, the Pandyas also became these incredible patrons of the arts. This stunning image of a celestial nymph from a Sitten vassal, wow, it just perfectly showcases their style. Look at the rhythm in that movement, right? The contours are so firmly drawn in red, but then the body is rendered in this soft yellow with really subtle modeling. It just creates this amazing sense of graceful motion. And then came the Cholas. By the 11th century, their power was at its absolute peak, and so was their art. These masterpieces from the Brihadeshwara temple are considered the high point of South Indian painting. And here's a crazy fact for you. For centuries, nobody even knew they were there. They were completely hidden under another layer of paintings from the Nika period. It was only when that layer was carefully cleaned away that these were rediscovered. The Chola style really represents a kind of perfection of form. The lines just flow so beautifully. The figures are supple and modeled with this incredible grace, and we start to see this elongation of the facial features. The subjects are just as grand, too. Lord Shiva in all his different forms, portraits of the patrons themselves, and these really dynamic scenes of dancers.
As we move into the 14th century, Chola power starts to fade, and a new empire rises, Vijayanagara. And with this huge new political power comes a really dramatic shift in art. We're not just talking about an evolution here, this is a whole new visual language. You know, it was maybe designed to tell these epic stories with more clarity to a much wider imperial audience. Okay, look at this comparison right here. On the left, you've got the fluid, supple, rounded forms of the Trollas. Now look to the right at the style of Vijayanagara. Can you see the change? It's huge, right? The whole style becomes more formal, more stylized. That flowing naturalism gives way to a more rigid, almost patterned kind of composition. So let's break down this new language. Faces are almost always in profile, but, and this is the key, the eye is drawn as if you're looking at it from the front. It's large and wide open, figures are pretty much two-dimensional, and scenes are often divided up into these neat rectangular boxes, kind of like a comic strip, which really helps guide the story. Oh, and look for the characteristically narrow waists. This scene from the temple at Lapakshi is a perfect example. You can see all those rules we just talked about in action. The profile faces, the frontal eyes, the defined sections of the composition. This style was just incredibly effective for storytelling, for laying out episodes from the great epics and events from the dynasty's own history. The influence of this Vijayanagara style was absolutely immense. It didn't just stop when the empire fell. Instead, it evolved and it gave birth to these vibrant new regional traditions, especially under the Nayakas and in the really unique school of Kerala. So the Nayaka rulers, who came right after the Vijayanagara Empire, were the direct inheritors of this artistic language. For the most part, they just continued the style that was already there. You know, adding their own minor regional twists, but keeping the core elements alive. But at the very same time, something completely different was happening further south. Down in Kerala, artists took some elements from the Vijayanagara and Nayaka schools, but they combined them with their own local traditions to create something utterly new, dynamic, and just breathtakingly colorful. Yeah, this was way more than just a little modification. It was a total reinvention. The artists of Kerala developed a visual vocabulary that was completely and entirely their own. So what made it so different? Well, the artists drew inspiration from vivid local traditions, like the dramatic masks and costumes you see in the Kathakali dance form and these colorful ritual floor paintings called Kalam Ezuthu. You can see it in the vibrant, almost luminous colors. And unlike the flat, two-dimensional Vijayanagara style, these figures have a powerful sense of three-dimensionality. The stories themselves were often drawn from local versions of the great epics. And here's what I think is the most incredible part of this whole story. This 1,000-year-long tradition of painting on walls, it never really died. It's still alive today in the vibrant folk and tribal arts all across India. In the Pithora paintings of Gujarat, the Mithila art of Bihar, the Worli paintings of Maharashtra. Which kind of leaves us with one last question to think about. In an age of digital screens, what new stories are being painted on our walls today? You know, when you think about India, it's impossible not to picture its temples. They're not just places to pray. They're these incredible stories, literally carved in stone. From the Himalayas all the way down to the southern coast, you'll find these sacred buildings everywhere. And here's the thing. Each one has its own personality, its own story to tell. But have you ever really looked at them? I mean, really looked? You'll see something fascinating.
A temple up north, with its soaring, almost rocket-like spires, looks completely different from a temple in the south, which might have these huge, colorful gateways. I mean, they're both Hindu temples, but architecturally, they could be from different planets.
So what gives? Are these just totally separate traditions? Well, not exactly. It's kind of surprising, but as different as they look, most Hindu temples actually share a common sacred blueprint. It's like a secret architectural language. And the cool part is, once you learn to speak that language, you can start to understand the design of pretty much any temple you see.
Okay, so let's dive right in and decode that blueprint. We're going to break down the basic anatomy of a temple into its most essential parts. Think of this as our toolkit for figuring out the rest of this amazing architectural story. If you look at this drawing, you'll see that the core of any temple really comes down to just three main parts. Once you get these three, you've got the key. So let's break them down, one by one. All right, first up, and this is the big one, the Garbhagriha. The name literally means womb house, which is such a powerful image, right? This is the absolute spiritual heart of the temple. It's usually a small, dark, cave-like room where the main deity lives. Everything, all the prayers, all the rituals, everything is focused right on this one sacred spot. Okay, next, as you move toward that inner sanctum, you'll pass through the mandapa. This is the entrance hall or portico. Now, if the Garbhagriha is this private sacred space, the mandapa is the complete opposite. It's a public space, a big hall where crowds of worshipers can gather together to pray and watch the ceremonies.
And finally, let's talk about the tower that sits right on top of the Garbhagriha. This is where you see the biggest difference. Up north, they call it a shikara, and it's this tall, curving spire. But in the south, it's called a vimana, and it looks more like a stepped pyramid. Honestly, this tower is probably the easiest way to tell northern and southern style temples apart, just at a glance.
Okay, so we've got our basic toolkit, right? Let's start our journey up in the north. We're talking about this huge area, pretty much everything north of the Vindhyan Mountains. This is where we find the first major style we're going to check out.
And that style is called Nagara. When you think Nagara, I want you to think up, think vertical, think elegant. These are buildings that just seem to shoot up from the ground, like they're reaching for the sky. And its absolute defining feature? That beautiful curving spire we just mentioned, the Shahara. This is a perfect example of the Nagara style. Just look at it. This is the Kandarya Mahadev temple in Khajuraho. There are two key things to notice here. First, see how the whole thing is built on a high stone platform? It's elevated. And second, it's not just one single tower. It's like a whole family of towers clustered together, with the tallest one, the main shikara, right over the Garbhagriha. It almost looks like a mountain range, doesn't it? Just stunning. So let's do a quick recap of the Nagara DNA, if you will. You've got the raised platform, you've got that signature curving shikara, and on top of that you have these crowning pieces, a circular disc called an amalaka, and a little pot-shaped finial called a kalasha. And one more thing to remember, Nagara temples usually don't have big boundary walls or fancy gateways. That's going to be important later.
All right, time for a little spot the difference. On the left, you see the Nagara style we've been talking about, all organic and curvy. But on the right, whoa, that's something else entirely, isn't it? Look at how sharp and geometric that is, like a pyramid made of steps. Well, that's our cue. Let's head south.
And just like that, we're in South India, the home of the Dravida style. And the vibe here is completely different. In the south, temples aren't just single buildings standing alone. No way. They are massive, walled-in complexes. They're basically like mini-cities built for the gods.
And here is a spectacular example, the Brihadishwara temple. Just look at its main tower, the Vimana. See how it goes up in these distinct, shrinking layers? It creates that classic stepped pyramid shape. It's so geometric, so powerful, and a world away from the curvy Nagara shikara. And notice how the entire thing is contained within those boundary walls. But honestly, the most jaw-dropping feature of the Dravida style is often just getting inside. This is a Gopuram. It's the monumental gateway tower. And in a lot of the later southern temples, these things got huge. They're covered in thousands of brightly painted sculptures, and they grew so massive that they completely dwarf the main temple, which is hidden away deep inside the complex.
Okay, so we've got the soaring Nagara style in the north and the sprawling Dravida temple cities in the south. Two very distinct flavors. But you know, India has always been a place where ideas and cultures mix. So that begs the question, what happens when these two powerful architectural styles run into each other?
Well, you get a third style. It's called Visara. You mostly find it in the Deccan region, kind of in the middle of India. And it's basically this super creative, experimental hybrid. The architects were like a bunch of DJs, mixing and matching elements from both the Nagara and Dravida styles to create something totally new and unique. Just check out the Durga temple at Aihole. Can you neatly fit this into the Nagara box or the Dravidian box? Nope, not a chance. I mean, look at that shape. It's semicircular in the back, which is really unusual. This is a perfect example of how Visara architects loved to experiment and just play with different ideas. So let's break down this mashup. The tower on top, that's got the feel of a northern Nagara shikara, just a bit shorter. But the pillared porch around it, that feels very southern, very Dravida. And that weird rounded back, that's actually a nod to even older buildings, specifically ancient Buddhist prayer halls. It's a total architectural fusion, and it's brilliant.
Okay, so now we have our three main players, Nagara, Dravida, and Visara. For the grand finale, let's just take a moment to look at a few absolute jaw-droppers, masterpieces of engineering and art that show these styles at their absolute peak. This is the Kailashnath Temple at Ellora. At first glance, it looks like a classic Dravidian-style temple complex, right? But here is the absolutely mind-bending part. This building wasn't built, it was excavated. A team of artisans started at the top of a giant hill of solid rock and carved down, chipping away everything that wasn't the temple. It's the largest single rock sculpture on the entire planet. Just think about that. Now, shifting to the Vesara style, the Hoysala temples are just famous for their insane level of detail. I mean, look at this. How did they do it? Well, the secret was the material. They used soapstone, which is a pretty soft rock. This allowed the sculptures to carve with the kind of precision you'd expect from a jeweler, creating this incredible lace-like detail you see on this statue of Shiva. And for our last stop, we're heading back to the Nagara style over in the east. This is the Sun Temple at Konark. And the amazing thing here is that it's not just a building that has sculptures on it. The entire building is a sculpture. The whole thing was designed to be a massive stone chariot for Surya, the sun god. And you can even see the gigantic, intricately carved stone wheels on the side. It's just incredible. So from those soaring spires to temples literally carved out of mountains, it's clear these buildings are so much more than just stone and mortar, right? They're like libraries of mythology, they're monuments to faith, and they are absolute masterpieces of human creativity that have stood for hundreds, even thousands of years. And that really leaves us with a big question. As we move forward, how do we make sure that these incredible stories, written in stone, are protected for all the generations that are yet to come?
We're about to dive into an art form that's literally been thousands of years in the making. It's a tradition of casting gods, kings, and even cosmic dancers in what seems like eternal metal. So let's get right into the magnificent world of Indian bronze sculpture.
Okay, just take a look at this. This is the Nataraja, Shiva as the Lord of the Dance. It's so dynamic, it's unbelievably intricate, and it was made 1,000 years ago during the Chola dynasty. So the big question is, how did ancient artisans with what we consider ancient technology create something so breathtakingly complex? Well, that's exactly what we're here to figure out.
To answer that question, we have to go back, and I mean way back. We're talking 4,500 years, right to the very beginning of this whole artistic journey.
This timeline really puts it all into perspective, doesn't it? It shows the incredible staying power of this tradition. We kick things off way back in the Indus Valley civilization. Then we see it grow and evolve for millennia until it hits this absolute golden age with the Cholas, and it just keeps on adapting. It's like this continuous thread running through the entire history of India.
So the key here is the material itself. Bronze wasn't just another metal, it was a total technological revolution. By mixing copper, zinc, and tin, artisans created this alloy that was not only super strong, but could also capture these incredibly fine details that just wasn't possible before.
And this is the very first masterpiece. Maybe one of the most famous statuettes from the ancient world, actually. The Dancing Girl of Mohenjo-daro. I mean, think about it. Her body is simplified, almost tubular, but her posture, one hand on her hip, her head tilted back, it's so confident, so relaxed, it feels astonishingly modern. This is where it all started, 4,500 years ago. All right, let's fast forward a couple thousand years. We're going to see how this art form really develops into what's known as the Classical Age. This is the moment when sculptors hit a whole new level of grace and realism,
especially when they were sculpting religious figures.
So during the Gupta and Vakataka periods, around the 5th to the 7th centuries, the art form really comes into its own. Artists start making these serene, youthful, and just perfectly proportionate figures, particularly of the Buddha. There's a delicacy to him, a refinement that just sets a completely new standard for everything that follows.
Now what's really cool about this slide is you can see the evolution so clearly. On the left, you've got the earlier Kushana style. It's powerful, it's muscular, and totally masterful in its own way. But then you look at the Gupta style on the right, and it's a different world. The focus shifts to subtlety, to perfect proportions, to grace. This was probably mirroring a deeper cultural shift, a move towards expressing inner peace and philosophy, not just raw physical power. I mean, just look at the clothing. It's either perfectly smooth or has these delicate little folds. This was truly the birth of a classical ideal.
Okay, so from that classical period, the art form just explodes into all these different regional styles across India. But there was one dynasty down in the south that would take bronze sculpture to its absolute peak.
And this image right here shows that diversity perfectly. Between the 8th and 10th centuries, you have places like Himachal Pradesh and Kashmir developing their own completely unique visual language. These weren't just copies of the Gupta style, they were entirely new, dynamic interpretations of their own.
But one dynasty really does stand out. As one source puts it, the most beautiful and exquisite statues came out of the Chola period. For 200 years, artists working under their patronage in South India created bronzes that are, frankly, considered some of the finest sculptures ever made anywhere in the world.
Which brings us right back to this icon, the Nataraja. It was the Chola artists who perfected this incredibly complex image, turning a deep theological concept into a breathtaking work of art that is just packed with symbolism.
Okay, let's decode this thing, because it's not just a statue. It's a story. The little drum in his upper right hand, it's speeding the rhythm of creation itself. The flame in his left hand, that's the fire of destruction. His lower right hand is making a gesture that says, "Don't be afraid." He's crushing the demon of ignorance with his foot, while his other foot, the raised one, offers liberation. And this whole dance is happening inside a ring of fire, the cosmos. Every single part of it has a profound meaning. So, we're back to our original question. How was all this even possible? Well, the answer is in this ingenious and incredibly painstaking technique that's really as much science as it is art.
This is the lost wax process, or cire perdue. It's a method that was mastered way back in the Indus Valley and has been passed down through generations of artisans. It demands an unbelievable amount of precision, patience, and skill.
So here's how it works, step by step. First, an artist creates a perfect, super detailed model in beeswax. Then, they cover that wax model in layers of clay. When they fire it in a kiln, the wax melts and drains out. It gets lost, leaving a perfect, hollow mold on the inside. Then, you pour molten bronze into that empty space. Once it cools, you literally have to break the clean mold to get the statue out. And after all that, it still has to be meticulously cleaned and polished. And here's the kicker. Because you have to break the mold every time, every single lost wax bronze is a completely unique, one-of-a-kind creation.
Now, this incredible tradition didn't just stop with the Cholas. Not at all. It kept evolving, serving new people and new purposes, and it's still going right up to the modern day.
So get this, by the 16th century, in the Vijayanagar Empire, something totally new starts to happen. Sculptors begin casting life-size bronze portraits of their royal patrons, of the kings and queens. All of a sudden, the art isn't just for showing gods, it's for preserving the legacy of actual people, capturing their likeness forever. This is a huge shift, using a sacred art form to make mortal rulers immortal.
And what's truly amazing, maybe the most amazing part of this whole story, is that this is a living art form. The very same skills that were used to cast the Nataraja 1,000 years ago are still being practiced today, especially in places like Kumbhakonam in South India. This isn't some lost art we rediscovered in a museum. It's a 4,500-year-old, unbroken, living tradition.
From a simple dancing girl to the cosmic dance of a god, and from divine icons to royal portraits, Indian bronze sculpture has told some truly epic stories. It really makes you wonder, in the hands of today's artisans, what new stories will be cast in this eternal metal?
You know, when cultures meet, they don't just trade goods, they create entirely new languages, in art, in food, and, as we're going to see today, in stone. We're about to dive into one of the most breathtaking stories of creation, the story of Indo-Islamic architecture. It's a centuries-long conversation that gave us some of the most famous buildings on the entire planet.
We've all seen this picture, right? The Taj Mahal. It's the ultimate symbol of love, a true wonder of the world, just a marvel of perfect symmetry and beauty. It is, in a word, flawless.
But here's the thing. Perfection like this doesn't just appear out of thin air. It's actually the grand finale of a long, fascinating story of art and engineering coming together. So, to really, truly understand the Taj, we've got to go back to the beginning.
Okay, so let's set the scene. Our story kicks off way back around the 7th and 8th centuries. This is when new people, new ideas, and new faiths start arriving in the Indian subcontinent. We're talking merchants, traders, and eventually rulers. And they brought with them totally new ways of building. This was the moment that set the stage for a pretty dramatic fusion.
And what came out of this mix? Well, we call it Indo-Islamic architecture. But don't let the name fool you, it's not just one single style. Think of it more as a rich blend of many traditions, a mashup of structural techniques, decorative tastes, and deep philosophical ideas, all of which got adapted and remixed over hundreds of years.
At its heart, this was a meeting of two completely different ways of thinking about engineering. The existing Indian style, called trabeate, was all about post and beam construction. Pillars holding up horizontal beams. It's incredibly strong, but it kind of limits how big of an open space you can create. But the incoming arcuate style, whoa, it was a game changer. It used true arches and massive domes, which meant that architects could suddenly create these vast, soaring interiors with no pillars in the way at all.
And it wasn't just about how they built things, it was about what they put on the walls. These were totally different worldviews. Hindu temple traditions were filled with sculpture, gods, people, animals all carved into the stone. Islamic art, on the other hand, forbids making images of living beings. So all that incredible creative energy got channeled into three main forms: unbelievably complex geometric patterns, flowing floral designs called arabesques, and the really high art of calligraphy. So the first big expressions of this new, blended style were often statements of authority. I mean, these were buildings designed to project power, to totally dominate the landscape, and to basically announce that a new group was in charge.
Just look at the Gwalior Fort. It's perched on this immense, steep hill. It is a complete masterpiece of defensive architecture. It was so intimidating, in fact, that even the Mughal Emperor Babur, a guy who was not easily impressed, was said to have been completely awestruck when he saw it.
And the design of these forts was pure psychological warfare. They were built on high ground, obviously, for strategic edge. They were often wrapped in concentric walls, creating these deadly zones for any attackers. The entrances were staggered to stop a battering ram or even an elephant charge dead in its tracks. And some, like the Daulatabad fort, had these devious, dark labyrinths where one wrong turn could trap an entire army.
And it wasn't just forts. Towers, or minarets, became these incredibly powerful symbols. Yeah, they were used for the call to prayer, but their sheer height was an undeniable statement of might and victory. And the most famous one, of course, is the Qutub Minar in Delhi. At 234 feet tall, this thing was an absolute feat of engineering for the 13th century. Its surface is just this beautiful tapestry of intricate carvings and bands of calligraphy, and look how it mixes these polygonal and circular shapes as it just rockets into the sky.
But, this new architectural language wasn't just for showing off worldly power. It was also used to express some really profound ideas about faith and about the afterlife. For these buildings, the goal wasn't to intimidate. It was to create a little vision of heaven right here on Earth. As the scholar Anthony Welch so perfectly put it, the whole idea behind the tomb was to be an eternal paradise. And that concept drove every single design choice. Tombs were placed in these lush, beautiful gardens, often with water channels, all to create a serene setting that was meant to evoke the afterlife.
And the design of the community mosque, or Jama Masjid, was just ingeniously simple and functional. See, it was built around this massive central courtyard called the San, so it could hold hundreds, even thousands, of worshippers. And on one side, you have the Qibla wall, which has that special niche, the mikrob, that points everyone in the direction of Mecca for prayer.
You can actually see the evolution towards the Taj Mahal in some of the earlier tombs. On the left here, that's the tomb of Itmad-ud-Dawla. People sometimes call it the baby Taj. And it's gorgeous, right? But it's made mostly of sandstone with these geometric inlays. On the right, well, the Taj takes those same ideas and just elevates them to a whole new level,
using pure white marble and these incredibly delicate, floral patterns made from semi-precious stones.
So when you look at the Taj Mahal, what you're seeing is a perfect symphony of design. It all starts with the garden, the Chaharbagh, which represents paradise. Then, out of that garden rises the perfectly proportioned marble mausoleum. It's flanked by those 4 minarets that give it this incredible sense of balance and symmetry. And then, as you get closer, you start to realize that every single surface is covered in the most breathtakingly detailed decoration imaginable.
And it's in those little details that you find the real soul of this architecture. I mean, the grand scale is impressive, for sure, but it's the intricate artistry that really truly captivates you.
One of the most beautiful elements is called jali, or latticed stonework. These screens, they're carved from single slabs of stone with just unbelievable precision. They were practical, yeah, they allowed for ventilation and gave privacy, but they also did something magical. They transformed sunlight into these mesmerizing, ever-shifting patterns on the floor. It's like sculpting with light.
And then there's pietra dura. Okay, this is just next level. This is the super refined art of inlaying tiny, perfectly cut pieces of semi-precious stones. We're talking jade, lapis lazuli, jasper, into marble. The final result looks like a painting, but it's made entirely of stone. It's like a permanent jewel-like garden blooming right on the walls.
And finally, calligraphy. All over these buildings, you see verses from the Quran rendered in this flowing, beautiful script, often inlaid with black marble against the white. This is so much more than just decoration. It literally transforms the walls into a sacred text, wrapping the entire building and anyone inside it in the divine word.
All right, to see how all of these ideas, the engineering, the power, the faith, and the art all came together in one place, we're going to look at one final monumental example from the Deccan region of South India.
This is the Gol Gumbad in Bijapur. It's the mausoleum of Sultan Muhammad Adil Shah. And right away, you can see it has a completely different vibe from the Taj, doesn't it? It's built from this dark local basalt, and it just has this gravity and power that feels totally distinct.
The genius of Gol Gumbad is that dome. It's one of the largest in the entire world, and it creates this massive, uninterrupted interior space. How does it stay up? With this incredible, ingenious system of interlocking arches. And famously, this design created a whispering gallery, where the quietest sound will echo again and again across the vast chamber. It's the perfect synthesis, a blend of Persian engineering with local Deccan materials and style.
So, from the mighty fortress to the heavenly tomb, Indo-Islamic architecture tells an incredible story of fusion, of power, and of paradise. It's a powerful reminder that buildings are never just buildings. They're chronicles written in stone. Which kind of makes you wonder, what stories do the buildings around you tell?